Okay, good morning, everyone. I am excited today to talk about podcasting and to join, and I'm excited about the guest that's joined us. I'm so excited, I can't get the words out of my mouth. Jyllea has joined us. So to try to get back to some of the standard way we used to do Business Brew, and I was pretty good to do introductions here and there, but the last few Business Brews I've sort of forgotten. And one of the original purposes of this was to do networking without calling it networking. And then also some feedback that I've been getting is that going 8 to 9:30 is really long. And that's a holdover from the previous format. So what I thought is we'd sign on, 7:45. We can do introductions for those of us who are on the Zoom. For those of us, or for those of you who are joining us on Facebook, go ahead and just introduce yourself in the Facebook comments. We'll make sure to try to read those and interact with those. And I wanted to get back to that. I think we're still a few months away from being able to do this live and in person, but I did want to bring back that opportunity to introduce yourself and meet other people. So what I'll do is I'll go through my list, Jyllea, and then we'll end on you. And then you can introduce yourself and then we'll get started. So good morning, Cheryl. You are joining us. You want to just give us a quick introduction, who you are, who you're with, and how you're doing this morning? Maybe. There we go.
Can you hear me? Sorry.
Yes, we can. No, you're fine.
I don't know why my video is not on, but I'm not really good at all this stuff yet. So my name is Cheryl Miller, and I am a co-owner of a company called WOTUS, Women of the United States.
Yay. Thanks for joining us, Cheryl. All right, Emily, you're up next.
I'm Emily. I'm with Bernardo Wells Architects. I'm the client engagement manager, and I'm excited to talk about podcasts. I was just telling Josh, I'm a pod head. So excited for this one.
The more I hear from you, the more I think we just need to hang out.
Yeah. See, that's why we do this. I want that. I want hangout sessions that are scheduled. That's so much cooler sounding than networking. All right. Dorothy, good morning. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you. Good morning to you too.
And Emily, you didn't tell us who you're with and how you're doing, but we'll let Dorothy do that, and then we can double back to Emily.
Yeah. So I'm Dorothy Zevenbergen, and I'm the owner of Cultivate Consulting.
Oh, thank you. Oh wait, now that I think about it, you did tell us. Yeah. Boy, it's not my jam today. This is we're on the struggle bus apparently. All right, and I do want to give a quick shout out to a few people who have joined us and announced themselves on Facebook. We have Will, Hera, and Gretchen. Good morning to all of you. And then my good friend Rob Rowley just joined us. So Rob, why don't you tell us who you are, who you're with, and how you're doing this morning?
Rob Rowley, I'm your local deaf and dirt attorney locally. I do all things real estate and estate planning, and life's good. It's sunny in Spokane, and I love springs.
Yeah. That's awesome. Okay, so Jyllea, fire away. It's all you. But you're muted.
I thought this was a question and answer session.
No, no, you just have to tell us who you are now.
Oh, yes. Okay, so I am Jyllea. I own Wonderment Marketing. And I'm kind of having like a business identity crisis currently. Not crisis, but I'm undergoing renovating like what I'm offering. And I've kind of settled on, at least internally, I'm a marketing content midwife. I really like bringing marketing content to life. If you know what you want, I can help you make it beautiful and make it real. If you have no idea what you want, like you have no idea how to word, I can take what's in your brain and make it real. So that's kind of what I'm using to make it make sense to me and make it feel like I'm not just, hey, I can like sell your thing. And in that process, I have found that one of my truest joys in life is podcasting. So that's why I'm here today. I started my show 2 Februaries ago. I took a really long break in the middle of the summer, I'm pretty sure. Just kind of trying to figure out, what am I going to do? I interviewed a bunch of female business owners, and that was great. And then I tapped everyone I knew and then kind of ran out of ideas. And I didn't want to just pump out content that I wasn't passionate about. And so I took a while to come back to, what am I doing? Who can I talk to? How can I make this broader and more accessible to whoever? So that's kind of me.
I think it's really comforting when marketers confess that they struggle with their own stuff. And I try to do that often. In fact, I was thinking about it this morning as a marketer, and then, trying to facilitate Business Brew. And then it's funny because I actually have a podcast. We'll maybe talk about that. It's like my dirty little secret. I struggle with saying some words regularly, and regularly is one of them. I have to, and similarly, I just can't get those out. So I love it when other people are willing to be transparent about the things that they struggle with, because it's so refreshing. So to hear you say, your business is going through an identity crisis, I hear that and I feel that. Also, Tiffany Mike has joined us on Facebook. So good morning, Tiffany. We have a few people trying to join us through Zoom, but I don't know if everyone, universally, if internet is slow, or if maybe it's just one of those mornings. So, and you were right, it is a question and answer, but I do like my guests to introduce themselves.
Right, I just forgot. I was just so ready. I've got my notes and I'm like, podcasting, man, and I just freaked out. I'm fine.
I'll tell you, out of all the, I get varying levels of preparedness from my guests, where some are like, yeah, whatever, and they just join and they're ready to go. Some are like, hey, I've got a slide deck. Is that cool? So for you sent me the list of questions as if it was I felt like it was Mark Wahlberg. You can ask me all about this, but you can't ask about the Funky Bunch, because if you ask about that, this interview is over. Right? That's where but I know that's not what you meant. Okay,
totally
so
not. You can ask me whatever you want. I just have prepared. You said if you have questions, that helps. So I sent all the ones I could think of, and I had a lot because I only just started a year ago, and so who I was at ground zero is very fresh in my mind.
Right, and you there. I don't know that we'll get through all of them. And I do want to point out real quick that you sent me a resource to share with everyone, and I want to share that before I forget. So if you find yourself wanting more from this conversation than maybe what we get to, I'm chatting everybody both on Facebook and on Zoom the link to her resource. I'll call it a resource guide. There's multiple resources there, not the least of which is a podcast resource. So, and also just quick shout out to Will on Facebook. He's actually done a really good job of introducing himself. He's the founder and chief barbell cook for Barbell Cooking. He says where we lift and eat well. I like that, lifting and eating well. So Will and I know each other. Will was a regular at the in-person Business Brew, so I'm excited that he's joining us. I've chatted the resource guide. I love to see all these faces. It's so nice to see everybody between Facebook and Zoom joining us this morning, and also catching that we made that format change. As I mentioned earlier, we're condensing it. We're doing about 15 minutes of introductions now from 7:45 to 8, and then it'll be all guest from about 8 to 9. If we do end up feeling like we go long, what we'll do is give everybody permission to just sign off, and we'll stay on and let those with extra questions to keep going. As always, if you have questions, feel free to use the Facebook comments or the Zoom chat to engage with one another, to ask questions. Emily's already jumped in and screamed at me. She yelly-capsed at me that she didn't know that I had a podcast. So now I guess I might have to talk about it. We'll see. And then our friend Max, or my friend Max, has joined. He says he does not have mic or video, but he is listening. So welcome, Max. Good morning. And without further ado, let's get after it, Jyllea. Okay, so
ready.
I've got all these questions. And I think what I want to start with is, so I have a podcast. I'm not going to talk too much about that, but it's with me and a friend of mine, Jason. and Jason, and I'm only telling this because I think it tees up most of these questions. And Jason is like the perfect, like ready, fire, aim person. And he was like, let's start a podcast. We've been meeting for coffee for several years. Let's just have those conversations and record it. And I said, okay, cool. What are we going to call it? He's like, doesn't matter. I said, okay, cool. What's our graphic going to be? What's our logo? Doesn't matter. Let's just record it and we'll figure it. And I was like, hard no. I'm a marketer. That freaks out my brain. And so I was like, let's just call it something. And I was pitching him ideas. He picked one. I created a graphic. He was like, okay, that works for me. And then we jumped in. Well, after a few episodes, people started pushing on us and said, like, this is great, but we have no idea who you are. So you need to, so we just kind of picked up those conversations like mid-sentence, and somebody was like, hey, we don't know who you are. Maybe some more background would be good. So I tell that story to say, like, if you have this idea of starting a podcast kicking around in your brain, what's that early checklist that you should be going through, Jyllea, to like get you started? What are some of the, like, do I need a high price mic? Do I, give us the list.
So I have just like a bare minimum list of like what you need before you press publish. And that does include episode artwork. Well, show artwork, really. Episode artwork. If you're interested, we can talk about that. But I feel like that's a very minor detail, very honestly useless, except for social media. But the very first thing is like a clear intention and strategy, especially like, it's less important if you're just doing it for fun, but this is Business Brew. You should probably know why you're taking all this time to do it for your business.
And so that I'm not just like throwing 100% shade at my friend Jason, like this was like personal for him. And for me, okay. I can't not turn off that business part of my brain. Like, I just think marketing and business like all the time. And so, yes, it was totally personal, but I still felt like maybe there were some steps that we should take. I did agree with him though, that like, we didn't need to invest in mics or anything crazy at the beginning, that we could let that stuff come later. So I don't know where you land on that, but I love your minimal checklist so far.
Thanks. And the title is good. I would say it's secondary to each and every episode title, but it's something that you're going to talk about all the time. When you're telling people about your podcast, the first thing they're going to ask is, what's it called, in brackets, so I can look it up. And if it's something you're embarrassed of or really long and confusing, like, it's not going to help anyone. So you need a title. And then show artwork might sound really intimidating, but Anchor, which I'll probably talk about later, and then I'm pretty sure 98% of the universe knows Canva. Both of those can be very helpful. No? Okay, maybe just 98% of millennials in business, just by the look on your face.
Maybe. So let's take before we dig into that, that's a great conversation, both Anchor and Canva. I want to know, I'm tooling around and playing around with a format. Are we more comfortable with broadcasting the speaker view? And you can hit me up in chat. I want feedback from Facebook and from Business Brew. Do you want me to just focus on speaker view, or would you rather see all the faces that have joined us and do gallery view? So hit me up. Let me know what you think on that. Here's my thought on Canva. I think Canva is like the single greatest marketing tool ever invented. It's amazing, and it makes things accessible. I love it when the playing field is leveled. So it takes things like Photoshop and Illustrator and makes it easy to use for people who don't need Photoshop and Illustrator all the time, right? So I 100% agree with you that it's an amazing tool. My experience has been I think marketers might know about it, but honestly, if you are at a business and you were given the job of marketing, you probably don't know about Canva. Like, if you were like, Emily's in business development and she does some marketing tasks, my experience is that people like her, not her specifically, but people like her aren't aware of it as a tool.
That makes sense.
But Anchor, let's stop and talk about Anchor, because we have to now.
Please, let's.
Okay.
It's not the only thing. It's not like, but it's my favorite thing. It's the first thing I've heard about. And if you listen to say 10 podcasts every once in a while, like every 2 months or something, you are bound to have heard an Anchor ad. And the thing about it is that when I was researching to start my show, the first thing I found was, oh, you need to have an RSS feed, which is like, as far as I could pick up, it's kind of like a domain. You have to buy it, you have to maintain it, you have to hook it up to your show and blah, blah, blah. And Anchor takes all that away. You just make an account. It's completely free. I mean, I think their pricing is based on like sponsorships mostly. Like they'll take a cut of that and that's it. But yeah, other than that, it's completely free. They just populate an RSS feed for you. They're partners with Spotify. They're connected to, and they'll just push your show to everywhere.
Everywhere.
For me, automatically, that took almost a whole year. I think it was like 10 months or something. But it automatically hooked up to Spotify like very quickly. I think it took like 50 minutes. And then I hooked it up manually to Apple Podcasts, which I think would have taken way longer if I hadn't done that. And then Google Podcast or Google, whatever the Google one is called. And so it just does that. And then if you don't have inspiration for your artwork, it has this little wizard that'll be like, what's your show called? And here, pick a stock photo that we're allowed to use. Do you want the Anchor logo or do you not? Okay, now you're done. Press OK and it's connected to your show. Great work. Or you can go on Canva, or if you're fancy, something Adobe, and upload your own thing. Mine is just a headshot with me in front of a mic. It says I want to know at the top. That's the name of my show, if I didn't say that. And that's it.
My podcast is literally a desert. It's the picture of a desert. Like I couldn't have gone more bare bones. I mean, it's got a purpley, sunset, but so I'll let that cat out of the bag. It's called Someone to Talk To, if you want to find it. And yours was called, again, one more time?
I Want to Know.
And here's what I found. Anchor. So Anchor, it's great. You put your podcast elements in there, so you still have to record it, but you can record using Anchor, or you can record using your own stuff. So my buddy and I Zoom each other. I record it in Zoom, and then I upload the audio later. So it's very accessible. And then it distributes that that podcast to all the major players. We have found it ended up on Apple, and we didn't even have to do anything. So it's pushing to Spotify, Apple, Google. I don't think it's pushing to SoundCloud, but we could double check that. So that might be the only one that it's not automatically doing. So as far as ease of use, I found it extremely easy to use. And then you're right. It does ask you to record like an intro commercial introducing Anchor. And then we've made like $1.32 so far. And so whenever we cash out, Anchor gets a big cut of that. So I don't know what their take is, but
they haven't even asked me to do that. So
yeah. Oh, good.
I'm just getting off scot-free over here.
Okay, so going through your starting checklist. So you've got this idea of a podcast. You got to call it something. You got to come up with a podcast title. You should definitely have podcast artwork. So artwork that defines the whole podcast. Like you said, yours is a picture of you with a mic, and then it says, I want to know. Mine is like a desert, and then 2 conversation bubbles, and it says someone to talk to. And then you are suggesting that possibly for each show, having a different piece of art for that show. But you said that's kind of a second point.
I would say that that's kind of like level 2. Like bare minimum, you just need like the one static piece of artwork that shows up in people's feeds. It's kind of like a logo for a podcast feed.
Right.
So whenever I was uploading separate episodes, and even looking at it myself, knowing my podcast and like the art that I made, I would go through and be like, where's my show? I couldn't find it because it wasn't the same every time. Your brain looks for those colors when you're looking for that show, and you can change it. People will figure it out. Like if you're not happy with it for some reason, then you can change it, just like your logo, and maybe even less complicated because it's not everywhere, but just keep it the same as much as you can.
Right. Okay. And then the last so far on your checklist is an Anchor account. Right. So we have to have an Anchor account, get it up and running. It's going to push that everywhere. Okay. Yeah. So let's walk this through. I've got my idea. I've done all that. I'm recording my first episode. What do I need to be able to do that?
That's the next thing that I wrote down is audio. So like Josh said, I've especially like since COVID times, Zoom has just been kind of miraculous. Even if we could meet together, it just takes a lot of pressure off people. Because, and especially like if you're meeting with one or more people, like even if you do have like a whole mic setup, I've found that if I have more than one guest, my mic setup all of a sudden gets a little complicated and I need to use this other thing. And if I wanted to get really fancy and have everyone have their own mic rather than using this like recording mic from a friend, then I have to get this other piece of equipment that I don't want to shell out for yet. So Zoom, you can have like 5 people on, and bless you for moderating that, but it's, it's free for the most part if you keep it under 40 minutes, and it's only what, like $16 a month if you don't, and a lot of businesses already have it. So that's great. Although, so that's number one, just because it's very accessible. Pretty much everyone already has it. Recently, I just discovered something called Zencastr, and I'm going to type it in here because it's spelled a little funny. And it's linked in that guide. But I just tested it out with a friend yesterday and recorded with nothing, just my MacBook, and she was just on her computer, and it recorded a video just like Zoom, but higher quality. And it recorded audio that was potentially, I need to compare them still, but it sounded great. If I were to just record straight into Anchor from my computer, it would have picked up so much chaos that was happening around me. And for whatever reason, it sounds great on Zencastr. I don't know what wizardry they use, but it was miraculous. So I'm gonna experiment with using that more. Their free version, at least while the pandemic is going, is like everything you'll probably need. But then they have a paid version that I think is only like $14 a month or something. And it's basically just unlimited everything. Their free version, like in regular times, is, I think you get up to 2 guests and then up to 8 hours of recording time in a month. And that, I mean, for me, that's all I need. And a lot of business podcasts I know are like 20 to 30 minutes. So you're not even going to need all of that. And then you just download the MP3 or the movie, or, I mean, you all obviously want the MP3. Sometimes you want the movie. We can talk about audiograms later if that comes up. Because that's kind of a big deal on social media, for people to see your face rather than just hear you. And it's just, it's made for podcasters, whereas Zoom is made for communication, like live more. So
one of the tools that I heard about was Riverside.fm. Have you heard of that one?
Nope.
And it's the same thing. It's a podcast specific recording tool, and I think it has audio too, and it came very highly recommended from a friend. So when we get to the recording thing, obviously you've mentioned Zoom's a good starting point. If you feel you need to level up, Zencastr and then Riverside have both come to us recommended. So when it comes to, let's talk about like pandemic style recording. So I record using these, right? My earbuds that came with my iPhone, and so does my buddy. And I have found that mine plugged into my computer record a better quality sound than his plugged into his phone. And he also has a very big bushy beard, and the mic rubs against the beard. And then he tried holding it for one, but like that didn't work either. So to get started, do I need to go out and buy a mic, or can I start with something else? Oh no, this is so bad. Jason, my buddy who's doing the podcast, he's trying to join the Zoom. Should I let him in?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll let him in. He gets to come in. I guess it's
we already
only fair.
know he's a great guy. So
yeah, that's
you
correct.
established that.
Yes. All right. So do we need to invest in mics? Could we use Riverside or Zencastr? Is that the place to start? You know, like what's next?
My journey was, let's just see if I even like this. So I just recorded. I have had the honor of splitting an Adobe Creative Cloud account with a photographer friend. And I think she's on the student discount. So I haven't messed around with anything like Audacity, or even like Anchor has editing tools that I've heard are will get you by pretty well. But just got distracted. Oh yeah, so I would just record straight into Audition from my computer. And that was fine for season, what I now call season 0.
It doesn't count.
Totally counts. I relaunched. And in that guide, again, I have the mic that I bought that was that I found it in an article that I just loved and pulled all of my preliminary podcast information from. It's on Amazon for $70. I got one, and then I was like, this is great, and bought a second one.
Can you chat us, if you think about it, the link to that, or just the name of it? That'd be great.
Oh, whoops, I totally clicked on it. Yes, I can do that right now. There you go.
Awesome. Okay. And then I'll share that with everyone on the Facebook.
Thanks. Oops. Chat. Okay. But again, it's not like it's like $70 or $140 depending on your format and what you're thinking of doing. Like it's not cheap for something that you're kind of messing around with. So I would just start with Zencastr, Zoom on your headphones, that kind of thing. I think I even have like a little list of like, when you're first starting out, do this. Although there's a lot of, okay, yes. So Zoom, or even your voice memo app, if you're adventurous and on Apple, or just like your computer on Anchor, or just like Zencastr and headphones, just whatever. And then if you're finding like there's a lot of background noise, you can always just throw a towel over you and your computer.
Oh, that's interesting.
That's cheaper. I just watched the Billie Eilish documentary. She was doing that in a hotel room, and I watched there's another documentary where a reporter was recording her voiceover in an airport doing that. So
my wife just shared with me literally this morning, and I'll chat it to everybody. There are these felt tiles that you can buy that they look like art, and you can customize them, and you can use them to soundproof like the walls in your office. And our challenge in our space is not so much the walls, it's that there's like zero insulation between the floors. And so if somebody's upstairs, it's like an apartment building, it's like you hear everything. So minimal soundproofing, obviously. I think the main takeaway so far is start with what you have and then grow into what you need. Yeah. Especially because there is in some of these, other than the towel idea, there's a financial investment in some of this. So most of the tools that you've mentioned, Canva has a free account, Anchor's free, Zencastr has a free version, Riverside, I believe, has a free version. There's a lot of ways to get started in a more of a grassroots way than going like, oh, I'm going to spend $1,000 to start a podcast for fun.
Please don't do that.
Please don't do that. Okay. So to get this on track with business, so I think you've given a really good place to start. Like if you're at all kicking it around, you can listen to the first 15 minutes of our conversation and I think get some really solid takeaways. But let's talk about some of the logistics of this. And that is like you and I, we're both consultants, and maybe some of the people like Rob's an attorney. There's some people watching this that might feel like if they do a podcast focused on their business, they might be giving away information for free. Right? And they might be devaluing their services. So what's our takeaway here? I know what I would say to those people, but I want to hear your input.
Yeah, I love this question. And I mean, maybe it's because I haven't gotten any pushback on it yet, but I have just heard from successful business people, you yourself included, and just seen myself that like you can teach someone how to do your job, exactly how you do it, but they can never replicate that. And on top of that, and so like a lot of people are hiring you not because they want to learn, but because they just want to get it done. And they trust you and your style to get it done. But on top of that, giving your knowledge away builds trust with people. The best way I've ever heard it is your customers will think, if this is the magic that they're giving away for free, what am I going to get? Like, how much more am I going to get when I actually give them money? And so, I've personally been doing a terrible job of like posting regularly, like tips and stuff, but my resources page is a lot of what I know. And I handed that to one of my clients before she signed a contract with me, and she was like, yeah, can you still help me?
You're like, no, don't hire me. Use this list. And like, yeah, I still want to hire you.
Yeah, and that's a lot of times what people will do. Like they either want someone to walk them through it, they want someone to do it for them, or they have really personalized questions that they will pay you to answer. That kind of thing.
There's so many nuggets in there, but the one thing that stood out to me almost the most is that they're paying you because they want it done. And they recognize that they could maybe learn it, but that may not give them the greatest ROI. But also, like, how many business owners have the bandwidth, or how many people with a current job have the bandwidth to learn one more skill or one more set of skills? Marketing is a set of skills. It's not just one single skill, right? Because you could come up with the greatest marketing campaign ever, but you still have to know how to push that to the people. And that's a whole different skill set. I think that's great. I always used to, I actually met with a company years and years ago that I was talking to them about starting a blog, and they were an interior decorator, and then and they did cabinets and all that kind of stuff, right? So interior stuff for your home. And I said, you should be doing DIY tips, like how to refinish your cabinets and all that. And they're like, why would we tell people that that's what we do? And I said, what you do is you show them that you're willing to help them, even if they don't spend money with you. But also you're hedging your bets that people are going to watch that and go, yeah, that's way too difficult. I'll just pay you to do it. Right? Like that's the bottom line. Like Rob could show them the legal Zoom form that they need to get a will started, but then they take one look at it and go, yeah, can I just pay you to fill this out the rest of the way? And that's what we did. I paid Rob. I was like, this is silly. Wills are weird and super adult. Like I wasn't ready for the level of adult that a will took. So if you're in that place, just hire Rob. You'll be so happy. Okay. So you got the knowledge thing. I think that's great. When it comes to whether you're a marketer or a business or not, you've walked through all these steps. You've overcome that obstacle of like, should I share my knowledge or not? I've recorded my first episode. I'm ready to go. What do I do now?
I mean, it depends on how comfortable you are with the ums and the ahs. Audacity is probably the strongest thing you'll get, the strongest editing software you'll get for free. It's not very beautiful the last time I checked. It's freeware, and so then like open source, and people have probably messed with it in the last decade since I've used it. But if there's like long pauses, like you'll want to take those out. But again, Anchor has those editing tools. So just if you're feeling really bold and you're like, yeah, we just jumped right in, we had the whole conversation, we said bye, now we're done. You could just upload that. Bonus points if you're able to find like intro and outro music that you like, that's royalty free and like legal for you to use, blah, blah, blah. But you don't need it for the first episode. But Josh made a good point at the very beginning that you probably should say like, hey, here's who I am. Here's why I started this podcast. Here's what we're doing. So, and like a trailer can do that just fine. And it doesn't have to be anything fancy. It can just be like clips from your first episode, even just to kind of give people like a little gist of why you're doing what you're doing, what your vibe is. A lot of people don't listen to trailers, I hear, but I usually do if I have no idea what the podcast is. And Emily's nodding, so so yeah, it's worth the time, even if like maybe 25% of people listen to it, like that, those are people listening to it who are deciding whether or not they want to keep listening to you. And admittedly, my first trailer is very silly, but I mean, it kind of does, it mostly does its job. I replaced it with like a new season announcement that's like more official. It's me talking through like, here's why I'm calling it season 0. Here's why those episodes still matter, but I learned a bunch of stuff and brand new, yay. And so that's the first thing people see now. I'm pretty sure I should double check that. I'm forgetting if I'm answering your question correctly.
You are. And a bit, you said a couple things that we need to stop and dig into. So you talked about music, which was on your pre-approved list of questions that Mark Wahlberg gave me that I'm allowed to ask. Jason and I, and shout out to Jason, he's on here. There's my podcasting buddy. I'm so sorry, Jason, I threw a bunch of shade before you jumped on. So you'll have to go back and listen to this.
He also defended you too.
So yeah, you can defend yourself later. After the show is not recording. We use Bensound, and I've used Bensound for a bunch of clients. Bensound.com is a resource that he gives royalty-free music. His requirement is you mention that you're using his music either in the description or on air. So I've used that a bunch. Jyllea, do you have a royalty-free, or maybe a place where I can, because I mean, people may not know this, but if you want to buy music, it's going to cost you an arm and a leg, because they know you're going to use it for potentially forever. I mean, once a podcast is published on Spotify, it's there until you take it down, and so they want to get paid for that. So I have found Bensound to be a really great resource in that grassroots category. If you have another resource, please by all means let us know. And I guess if you're musical, like I have a guitar back here, I could just record my own intro.
That's the safest, is to like make an original little, it could even just be a jingle, it doesn't have to be like this whole magical Hans Zimmer soundtrack. It could just be like doom, 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 and then you're done. And then that's like, that signals the beginning of a show, which is another thing. That's something, one of my very favorite podcasts. For their transition sounds, it's a magazine, and so they'll use songs, like new music that's coming out that people have sent them, and say like, hey, can you push this? And they used to intro the show for years and years and years. They used to intro the show with new music too. And I just, like a year and a half ago, they stopped doing that, and they have a static intro and a static outro. And it has just been a joy to know that, like, whenever I hear, and it's like kind of like this funky little beat, and it'll get stuck in my head, and I'll sing it around the house, and it's always a signal to me that one of my favorite shows is coming on. So don't change your intro or your outro. It's kind of like your episode, your show art. It's just it's a mental signal to people that your show is starting or ending.
Wait. So you're saying that if we haphazardly launched a podcast, and I'm not talking about me and Jason, I'm just speaking in general, and we picked a graphic that worked, and we just did it to get going, and we picked music, you're saying, your suggestion is don't change that unless you absolutely have to?
Not exactly. I mean, you like mess around with it, sure, but like be intentional about the music that you include in your show.
Okay, so settle into a groove, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, and use your best judgment. You can all of these things are malleable. You're allowed to change and grow and decide that your first season is actually season 0. Like you can do things. Like people are gonna be kind for the most part. The podcasting community is nothing like YouTube comments, as far as I can tell.
That's refreshing.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we've walked through everything, and then you've suggested that the tool remind me of what it is to was it Audacity? You said to clean up and so we've done all that. Now we're recorded. We've published it. Right now, what? Do I need to, I'm going to ask a couple questions so we can keep this going. Do I need to announce it, and what's the right way to do that? And then how often should I now be publishing content?
Yes, those are great questions that I came up with.
Those are great questions that you came up with.
Okay, let's see. Okay, so number one, your website, if you have one, is good. I'm assuming that there may be some like personal people on here. If you don't have a website, whatever. But in that case, blast it on your social media if you have that. Because the bottom line is wherever your audience is going to find you, whoever your ideal listener is, whoever they are, wherever they see your content, tell them. Even if it's your Christmas letter, I don't care. If it's just for your friends and family and that's how you want them to find out about it, go for it. But since we're talking business here, yeah, again, email newsletter is a great announcement. It's just another reason to like put your brand in front of people and be like, hey, we're starting a podcast, yay. Social media, every time you publish an episode, and kind of like, yes, LinkedIn is great. And even though my podcast is mostly personal, I still put it on there anyway. So just it, and for me, it's like a portfolio builder, because every episode I make the title, I write the description, I have produced the entire thing. I got the guests, I scheduled them, I did all the things, I pushed it out on Anchor. So it shows that I can do all that. And then on top of that, I have done all the social media posts associated with that episode. So it's just like this magical package of content portfolio. But the other extreme of that bottom line is don't just press publish and expect people to find you.
Even you mean sort of like don't just put an open sign on your door and expect people to walk into your business?
Yes.
Nobody ever does that, right?
Right. Unless you're someone like Dax Shepard or Malcolm Gladwell, like, but even they post on their social media, you know, they're saying, hey, I'm starting a podcast, hook yourself up.
Okay, so before we get to the second part of that question, which is how often should we be publishing content? You said something, you said wherever your ideal listener is hanging out. That was a packed statement. And we're marketers, so we understand the depth of that. But can you talk a little bit about, like, if I'm recording, like Jason and I are just recording our conversation, we maybe don't know who our ideal listener is, or maybe we do, but how would we find it? Like if we're just trying to record, maybe we are in business, but we're not marketers. Like how do we know that? How do we learn that?
Mm-hmm. To answer this question the most straightforward way, I'm just going to assume that you're a business person starting a podcast. And if you've hung out with Josh at all, I feel like you have heard him say to track your metrics. And if you're not doing that, get on it. Because that's how you know where your audience is. Wherever you have your highest engagement rate, wherever you're getting the most likes, engagement rate's more important, but you get it. Wherever people are letting you know that they're seeing your content and saying like, hey, I like this, or responding or clicking on your website from there, that's going to be your number one podcast platform. That's pretty much all that means.
That's pretty sound. And I also think that if you're getting into this, even if you're in business, understanding the hashtags that might be associated with the conversations that you're trying to have, and then the hashtags associated with your audience, especially on platforms like LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter, can be really, really powerful. And I also like that you really, I mean, I don't know if you intentionally did this, but like that website comment earlier about posting it on your website, like I felt that, because I've tweeted about our podcast, but I certainly haven't put it every business place yet, because it's not directly correlated. But I like what you said about you're using it because it's showing a skill set, and I think that's really cool. But I mean, how many businesses do we know that do other things? They have a Facebook page, but they don't link to it on their website. They have, you know, LinkedIn profiles, but they're not connecting them to their website. Like your website for most businesses is the hub of that business. Yeah. So tying your podcast into that is great. And if I'm not wrong, you take each podcast and you use it and you blog about it, right? You write it as a blog. Is that how you're doing it?
Sort of. I basically just take everything I put into Anchor and make it fit my Squarespace layout. I ultimately want to turn it into a blog sort of thing. And even if it's just my, like, what I learned from talking to this person, or here's like a write-up on, you know, here's 300 words on what I learned from Naomi Miller's trip to Australia. Like, then sure, you know, then that's more content. And audio content is growing, but I think people still read blogs if they're interesting and relevant to them. So,
well, just from
but yes, I have it set up. I have my podcast on my website set up as a blog, but then there's like on Squarespace, there's like something you can check to say like, oh, it's a podcast, and it'll change all of its little boxes for you.
Right. I think just from a pure marketing best practices standpoint, I do this with Business Brew. Each Business Brew gets posted. The video I repost to all the platforms that'll accept an hour of content. And then I blog about it and I embed the YouTube video into my blog. And I take notes and I try to write a summary. I have more questions for you specifically about what we should be doing with Business Brew, but we'll save that for later because I do want to get to the next question, which was, how often should I be publishing content? And then Gretchen jumped in on Facebook and said, what is there an optimum length? Is there a minimum or maximum? So these are, I think, really good questions to tackle next. I've done my first podcast. When should I do the next one? How long should it be, etc.?
This is going to sound like a total cop-out, but my very first bullet point is it all depends on your goals.
That's not a cop-out. I'm a marketer. I buy that. I feel that.
Okay, great. Because I was thinking about like all the different things that people would want to do with a podcast. With business, if your podcast is directly associated to your business and you're just talking about, I don't know, I'm going to say marketing. If it's just like a marketing topic every time, you could, I would maybe be a little bit itchy, but I wouldn't tell you not to like just record all those episodes, publish them in a day. Like you're basically going to spam people's podcast feeds doing that. So I don't like recommend it, but at least now your podcasts are out and now you can reference any single one of them for any of the content that you have going on for however long. If you're going to do that, I would more recommend like putting it out one a day so that they're like interspersed and people are more likely to like see them and find them. There is one person I know who I saw put out like 5 in a day and I was like, all right. But also I scrolled right past them. My goal, it's like I said, a portfolio builder, more doing it for hobbies and like digging into like all these different things I don't know about my friends that I want to know, hence the title of my podcast. I would love to be once a week. That's just not the season I'm in right now. So every other week seems fine. I even went so far as to take a poll on Instagram where my audience hangs out. And I said, like, would anybody be opposed to every other week? Is that weird? Does that make you sad? And everyone was like, no, that's fine. Live your life. So you could also just crowdsource your strategy, like parts of your strategy, and see how people feel about it. That might also help if they know that you have a podcast, but you could also just come out and say, hey, I have some ideas, and just be vague and general and blah, blah, blah. But again, you just needs to line up with your goals. And if you have specific questions about that and like have ideas about like, oh, well, if I do this, what should it be? Then we can talk. But that's going to be too long of a conversation.
If there's one thing I love about the era that we're living in, and it's a weird era, and I'll give it that, but it's that this idea, this permission-based idea that you have the permission to do what works for you, I think is really powerful. So when it comes to creating and publishing content of this nature, podcasting, you first and foremost, what I hear you saying is do what makes sense for you based on what you're trying to accomplish. What are your goals? What are you trying to do? And if your goals align with a daily podcast, then that's where you go. But if your goals are like, we just want to put content out there regularly, once every 2 weeks, once a week, once a month might be okay. And I also liked what you said. You have like all these nuggets that I feel like we have to get in and unpack because like my brain gets it, but I want to make sure we're not glossing over. But you said you can reference now because these are out there. You can reference old podcasts as a way to keep people, engaged, or to as a way to, draw a timeline. We talked about this in episode 1, or we talked about this in episode 3, or, season 0, this all came up. So I like that. And just that you're willing to give people permission, but also another nugget was this idea of crowdsourcing. It can be a double-edged sword, but when it comes from, if you are honestly trying to learn from your audience, there's no better way to do that than to ask, right? Yeah. Okay.
Especially on social media, don't ask questions you don't want to hear the answer to. I thought about it and I had to say, like, I embraced if people say, I don't want you need to do this every week. I was like, all right, that's what I have to do to keep my audience involved, to keep up with my goals of growing an audience that's bigger than just my teeny little friend circle. But everyone was cool with it. So I just went along with what was more comfortable. So
Emily's
if there's a question, you're like, I don't know what they're gonna say. And I don't like, if they say the opposite, you have to be prepared for that, or just don't ask it.
right.
Or be brave enough to be like, I hear you, but also no.
But Emily jumped in with some really good feedback about this frequency thing, that she listens to podcasts of all frequencies, once a month, 2 a month, 1 a week, every 2 weeks. She loves them all. She did point out, and I think this is key, that they are always consistent. They always know it should be out every other Monday so that she can go listen. So she's saying that, even aiming, if you're doing it every 2 weeks, but aiming for every Tuesday or whatever might be a really good goal. Jason and I are striving for that, to try to do every 2 weeks. And to try to publish, on or around a Tuesday. It didn't occur to me that this is like scheduled TV viewing, right? Like there are people who are so excited about what you're doing, or might be so excited about what you're doing, that they're making a point to remember when you're going to publish new content.
My 2 favorite shows come out on Tuesdays and Fridays. And you better know that I wake up on Tuesdays and Fridays and be like, I'm going to go hang out with my friends now. Meaning I'm going to go go to Apple Podcasts and press play.
Oh, that's so hard. I hate hearing everything about that. Okay. Next question. Are you ready for more? I feel like we could end right now and you'd have more than enough content. But one of the things that, as we were talking about this, that really stands out to me is this really does. I mean, you were saying your credentials as you were listing off the skills that it takes to get a podcast, especially if you're doing one centered around bringing on guests. You're scheduling guests, you're facilitating the conversation, you're producing it, you're then editing it, you're publishing it, and then you're marketing it. And that's 6. And I know that there's more. That's
another thing I should say, that as a business, if you're able to just do a bunch, like a series of solo episodes, do it, because it's easier.
Right. Yeah.
You don't have to.
That sounds
I needed them for like emotional reasons. I maybe we'll get into this later, but like I've had to work, like a lot of season 0 was me working through a lot of insecurities. And like remembering that I like actually learning that my voice is important.
Yeah. Wow. That's really profound. I to me, I feel like I'm pretty confident in a lot of areas, but doing a solo one sounds more intimidating than because I like that energy of, the interaction. I could do a workshop. I could teach people something as a podcast, but I don't know that that's anyway, we could get into that.
Right. And that's what I mean. Like if you can, in all senses of the word, do it yourself. I could not bring myself to do it alone. I was like, me by myself into the universe is worthless, which isn't true. But I would get in front of the microphone and just say nothing. So
okay, help me walk through this as a mental block, because one thing Jason and I were doing is he went back the last time we recorded, and we realized some of the feedback we were getting, and we were attentive to it, was that, your conversations are great, but we don't know who you are. And so maybe you need to and we just forgot, because we've been doing this. We meet for coffee every other week for like 6 years. We forgot that, we already know each other's story, but not everybody else does. So in the last episode, Jason walked through his story. If he were to do that solo, is it better to pretend like you're having the conversation with active listeners, or is it better to just talk? Because I think, to me, I would do better alone, like recording alone, if I felt like there was somebody actively listening to me. So like it helps me envision my audience. But do you have any other tips for that?
Yeah, I think I think that's personal. Like for someone like us, like we need to just everything you're saying. And if I say like, I guess I should just speak for myself. For someone like me, when I'm recording my introductions for every episode, I have to think of the people who I know 100% are listening to my show every Monday. I'm talking to them. And I'm also remembering. So those are things you can think of those as the people like in your front row, or you're like, those are the people who are closest to you at the dining table, or however you want to think about that. And then there are also people who are just walking in your door, or who are sitting in the back, and they just got there, and you have to talk to them too. I didn't introduce myself all of season 1 so far until 2 episodes ago. So I finally started saying, Welcome to another episode of I Want to Know. I'm Jyllea. So when you say you're talking about your story, when he's telling a story, or just even when you're in the middle of a conversation and you reference, oh yeah, that really hard time in 2018, remember those people in the back. Remember the people who don't know that story, and just remember that, yes, you are sitting at a table talking to your friend with a cup of coffee. Also, there are people sitting next to you. And just like you, I'm assuming that you're like this because you're a kind person. If there were people sitting next to you and you're having that conversation and they're listening and engaged in everything, you wouldn't just gloss over that. You wouldn't just tell an inside joke and then leave it. And they're all confused and like trying to like politely smile and get through the moment. You would say, oh, hey, so let me let you in on this funny moment, or let me let you in on this thing I just referenced.
So that, I feel all of that. I feel seen. We have been told that the best part of our podcast is it sounds like you're overhearing a conversation at a coffee shop.
And I love that vibe.
But it didn't occur to me, and it occurred to Jason, that we should be aware that we're being eavesdropped on and that we should provide context. And I think we do okay, but it's your whole point about your podcast needs to be for the people in the front row and the people in the back. Think like any great movie franchise. I'm a big Star Trek nerd, and I've been watching all of the movies again. Mm-hmm. And every time they take a minute to at least bring along the new viewer. They don't redo everything, but they at least they introduce the personalities and the power dynamics and the relationships so that you can step in some of it and catch what's going on. Mm-hmm. And I think that's your point, that you have to be aware that there's two groups of people at any given time when doing a podcast. Is just, if not the best piece of advice you've given, it's definitely in the top 3. Okay, so my point as we got onto this sidetrack, which is totally fine, was I was going to just point out, as you were listing all your credentials because of what it takes to produce an episode, that can sound, if not overwhelming, certainly time consuming. Is this worth it? Is it worth the effort?
I would check your metrics. So if you use Anchor, and pretty much, I mean, any publishing platform that's worth its salt will like show you your metrics. And even Spotify is its own thing. And I think only like 49% of my listeners or something listen through Spotify, but I just watched their like audio conferencey thing, kind of like their like Steve Jobs like annual announcement thing type vibe. And I haven't looked into it yet, but they have a thing for creators where you can go into the back end and see things like that. But then, Anchor has metrics that will get you by, and it'll fill out your spreadsheet and it'll give you enough information. Every once in a while I'll go in there and I'll be like, oh, how many like a lot of they don't give you downloads. They'll give you like listeners and audience and this many listens in this time frame. And what's fancy is you can even go into every episode and see where you're losing people. It'll show you like how consistently people are finishing, like how far they get into your episode before they're like, nah.
Oh, or man, Facebook gives us
to listen.
Oh yeah, sorry. Facebook gives us that for the live, and it's I have to turn off my human take it personal brain, because I know, people are busy and an hour is a huge thing. And so, I mean, I guess the same rules apply for a podcast, that like, you can't expect people to hang in there with you the whole time. So you have to because I don't listen to podcasts, which is like the grand irony of this whole conversation. I have not, what did Emily say? A podhead? I'm like the furthest thing from them. I can't get into them. But I understand that even if you're into podcasts, you may not have the bandwidth to listen to a whole one, right? Like I get that.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I used to work for a podcasting network, and there are a handful that I like check in with and follow, but a lot of them are 50 minutes, and I'm just driving a Target. So if you're not done in 15 minutes,
Yeah.
That's another thing about like length of time. Think about your ideal listener and where they're listening and how much time, like how much of a block of time they have, and how committed they are to you to finishing the episode. And if they're not, you best keep it short. And if your what you want to do with your show doesn't fit that, maybe you just rethink it.
Okay.
Strategy, man, strategy.
Right. So just a reminder, anybody can ask questions. The conversation on Facebook's been really interesting. It's been more just celebrating you and your input and what's been going on. So that's great. Also, I just want to point out Cheryl, who joined us. She's with Women of the United States, or WOTUS. They want to start a podcast. So she actually joined us to learn about starting a podcast. And she said it was packed with great information. So at least, we know we're reaching the right audience with this. So just a reminder, you can ask questions, you can use chat. If you really want to ask it live, we can do that too through the Zoom. But I want to ask you a couple of questions now about, related specifically to, we've created all this stuff and there's a couple of things we need to be aware. And the biggest one to me is, what if my podcast is its own thing and doesn't necessarily tie directly into my business? How do I navigate that space?
So this is one of the questions that I got from from the same photographer that I split Adobe Creative Cloud with. And I thought this was such an awesome question. Basically, like my just pat suggestion is give it a separate name that's more prominent than yours, but also keep it connected to your brand's look and feel. Or Josh, in your situation, if you want it, if you just want it to be this is a thing that I do, this is a thing that I can do for you, I would put it under services or portfolio, or just leave it on your LinkedIn, or put it on the bottom next to all your social stuff, that kind of thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I've taken the steps with the podcast Jason and I do to completely brand it separate from my business, because I viewed it as a purely personal endeavor. Mm-hmm. I'm now rethinking that just from the standpoint that it's sort of like no news or all news is good news or whatever, right? I kind of take it that anything I could do to promote my brand, whether it's my personal brand or my company's brand, is all pointing toward the same thing. So I've actually gone through and actively tried to rethink that. I would only tweet it on my personal Twitter account. Jason's really good to post about it on Facebook and tag me in it, but I never considered, posting it on LinkedIn. And I even told him I've thought about putting it in my newsletter, but this kind of gives me that permission to do it, as long as I think it comes back to what you've said, and it's not a cop-out answer, but it's, what are your goals? What are you looking to accomplish? I'm not necessarily looking to drive business from this, but I am looking to grow an audience, right? Which is sort of the same thing. Okay. So,
one other thing that I want to say about that. So you probably won't get sponsors right away, but you can self-sponsor and just write ads for yourself.
Oh my gosh, that's the smartest thing I've ever heard. It didn't even occur to me to do that. So, okay, let's walk through that. What does that look like? Tell me more about that.
The most recently, what that looks like for me, I had one of my designer friends on, and she just gave me a brand consultation, and it was a whole episode. And so I was just talking. It was like we said, I probably couldn't have just sat down on my mic and been here, let me just tell you all about my business and things that I'm working through. But I put a mic in front of us while we had a conversation that I was going to have anyway. And now I can point to that episode as, oh, you want to find out, you want to take a deep dive into wonderment? Go listen to that.
That's such a great idea, though. This idea of it's kind of where Jason and I landed, but this idea of recording organic conversations that were going to happen anyway. I will say this, Jason and I talked about this in our very first episode. Our first episode was basically me admitting I never wanted to start a podcast and apologizing to Jason because he had been wanting to do it for so long. And then at the same time going through our processes for we recognize that the conversations we'll have that are recorded will be different than the ones that we have when we're not recording, 100%. Because there's going to be some content that Jason and I are comfortable talking about one-on-one that we're not necessarily comfortable sharing with everybody. And I mentioned that it was a lot like it was the difference between being a stand-up comedian and a podcaster is when you're a stand-up comedian, everybody knows that once they know you, they're a target for comedy, right? But when you're podcasting, that's not everybody understands that they might be a target for an episode. right? And we needed to be intentional about that. Whereas like if I was a stand-up comedian and that's how I paid my bills, my wife would understand that and would know that she's going to be a target. But podcasting is not anywhere in the same league. So she, you know, so I there's been so much good information in this. It's hard for me to pinpoint one thing, but you that idea that recording these organic conversations, especially if you're a brand, you know, I think about Emily and she's with Bernardo Wills Architects and them just having these architecture conversations around the design challenges or things that inspire them could be really cool, engaging content, not just for other architects, but for people who are just fascinated by building or landscape or whatever. And that your idea of just recording these conversations is just like, it's huge to me. I hope it was a big thing, like an aha moment for other people, but I found it really fascinating.
Oh, and if you want a really great example of branding plus podcasting plus a business, Trader Joe's podcast. It's like 20 minutes, sometimes 10.
What are they? It's called, what's it?
I think it's just called Inside Trader Joe's.
Yeah. Or no, yeah. Inside Trader Joe's. Yeah. With the play on words, right? Inside Trader Joe's.
Oh, I never put that together. Wow. I feel
that
silly.
was the first thing that stood out to me. I don't know why. Okay. So as we round this down, we got a few more minutes left. I want to just again remind everybody, officially the conversation ends at 9. You can always peel off earlier if you have to. If you want to stay on, we can ask questions. I hope Jyllea has the time. But I want to ask you something really specific to Business Brew, because I think it's going to help us put this into a greater context. One of the things that I had to start doing when the pandemic happened was transition this from an in-person meeting that happened at Fellow Co-working to an all online Zoom thing. And I didn't struggle with that. I knew it was the right thing to do. And I've recorded them. I've blogged about them. I post them. I've done all those things. It never occurred to me to take the audio and to repackage it as a podcast. And should I be doing that?
100%. I have been meaning to tell you that.
Oh my gosh, that's terrifying. So people are like listening to this and going, this should really be a podcast. And I'm just like missing it. It's like my aversion. I mean,
when you started doing that, I was like, they're already recorded. And again, there's not that many pauses. It's like a back and forth conversation. And you do a great job of keeping things moving like it's kind of live TV. And that's perfect for an unedited podcast. You just chop off the beginning and the end if you need to. You throw it up and then you're done.
So I
was going to offer to like do that for a couple episodes to like see how you felt. And I still could, but I feel like now you know enough to just do it.
I wouldn't say that. You mentioned some stuff that I wasn't even doing, like that there's software that can edit out our ums. And I was like, oh boy, like
not automatically.
No, I know, but like I know enough because so here's the other big dirty secret about this whole thing is my actual 4-year degree is in video and audio production. So I have the skill set to do a lot of this. It's just very like I have been dusting it off slowly. So editing, I'm doing everything in iMovie because it's free and I understand the software, but it's definitely not an audio editing thing. So basically Jason and I hit record and hit unrecord, and we might cut out a couple things, but we do try to keep it like all in one punch, right? Hit go and then hit stop. Which is how I try to approach Business Brew, but that came from the live environment, right? Like the live environment requires no awkward pauses, or at least minimal awkward pauses.
There's no backspace.
Right. So, okay. So yes, I should be podcasting it. Now, I guess now that I've got almost a year's worth of these episodes, I shouldn't just data dump them, right? Should I go through intentionally and release them? I've got a backlog now of probably 11 episodes. What do I do?
Evaluate your goals, Josh.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, I'm thinking of like you just publishing like one a week, just saying like, I mean, I also am not completely familiar with like your email newsletter, but I'm imagining like one of those going out like once a week and saying like, oh, in case you missed it, here's this.
So I'm a 2-time-a-month newsletter person, and the format has been it's been mostly Business Brew. If I write the occasional non-Business Brew blog, I include that. And so because I've been recording them, what it is here's the next one, and if you missed it, here's the last one. And now I'll start including probably the link to the playlist on YouTube with all of them, so you can binge it. That's been my new thing is binge Business Brew, which like literally no one will do. but I think it's funny to play on that. So yeah, I guess the next logical step is to go through and start uploading them as a podcast. If I did do one a week, and I'm thinking out loud, so for those of you still hanging in there, I know this got a little like hyper business brew, but as I'm thinking about this as a content creator, somebody who's responsible for generating content, if I took 11 or 12 of these and I shared them once a week, I just bought myself 12 weeks of at least one post.
Sure,
right? And that's the way I'm always thinking about this, not to mention the episodes that come out while I'm sharing, these, because if I start now, April will happen, if not May. So being mindful to content, you and I both know creating content for the socials is one of the most challenging skills that you need in marketing. Emily's shaking her head because she's the one providing content for Bernardo Wills. She understands that struggle. It is, and because you feel like you're in a vacuum, you feel like you're always creating content that feels the same. And I have to remind myself and my clients, you're the only one seeing everything. You're the only one that heard every episode of your podcast, right? Unless you have like extremely loyal listeners. Okay, so yes to podcasting business brew. So
and I would also say, like, as much as you can, try to publish with your same, like your other channel rhythms,
right?
As much as that makes sense. Which the closest, like, parallel to that would be your newsletter.
Yeah. Okay. That's good. I am not above getting feedback on my own brand. So like, hit me with it. If you're like, you're not doing enough, there you go. So, okay. So as we wind this down, Jason, I have to just let you unmute yourself. I told the story of how I very reluctantly got into podcasting, but was also, I was like, you were, let's go. And I was like, hold on, wait. And I teased you. So step in and defend yourself here, my friend, or introduce yourself.
I don't know if I necessarily need defending. Right, what you said is absolutely true. I have always been a jump first, figure it out later kind of guy. And that's just the way I live my life. My wife loves it. She doesn't. It's been a really good, I feel like it's been a really good experience for both myself and for Josh. And while he was a little bit more reluctant to dig in, I also understand that he and I have different strategies and different goals. And Josh looks at things from a perspective that I don't see them from. And that I feel like has been really good for the both of us because we have the ability then to play off of each other's strengths. So yeah, you're right. I jumped. We were unprepared. We had no plan. We didn't know what we were doing or how we were going to do it. But I feel like 5 episodes in, while we've had to kind of take a minute and backstep a little bit to figure out what we need to do next to continue to move forward, I don't necessarily feel like that's been a bad thing. We are kind of figuring it out as we go.
Yeah.
But for me and for the feedback that I'm receiving from people that I know listen to it, it's been great, even though we're kind of stumbling along at this point, right? We can call this our season 0. And for season 1, we're going to be fantastic.
Yeah. So I do want to give some credit to Jason here in this part too, because your willingness to do this pushed me into a place I wasn't comfortable to go. And I think that's like one of the big milestones, like the big, hallmarks of life is to do things that don't always make you comfortable. It's a way to stretch and grow. And just like that openness, I was against it. 1, I'm not into podcasts, but 2, I didn't know that I was ready to be that naked in front of people. And then the other thing, and I'm a pretty transparent dude when it comes to like my business, but like my personal life, those are where I struggle. But then the other thing Jason said to me, we had this conversation before we hit record, and Jyllea, I want to hear your feedback on this, but we'd been meeting for coffee like every other week for years, for 6 years, if not longer. And so when we hit record, we stopped having those conversations, those unrecorded conversations. And Jason was like, we can't just become podcasting buddies. We have to stay friends. And so we have to make room for those unrecorded conversations as well as those recorded conversations. And I think that that's something that people might run into as well, right?
Yeah. So my very favorite podcast is called Annie and Eddie Keep Talking. It's started when Annie got put into quarantine back in like a year ago yesterday. And she's super extroverted, lives alone, and knew she was going to go insane. And Eddie is her best podcasting friend. And like they know each other through podcasting, but then they've become best friends since then offline. And so she was like, just to like keep me alive every day, can we record a podcast every day of my quarantine? And they just kept going for like a month. And then finally they would just were like, okay, this has to be twice a week. And we're also taking it off my main podcast feed and making just a brand new show on my network. She's very cool and very established. And so something they do and something they reference is that they have an offline friendship, and they will catch up before press record and have their list of things that they want to talk to everyone about and like talk to each other about, but then like share with everyone. And then usually like they're done after that, but then they'll like make time to catch up afterwards and like in between that time. So I would say for this specific relationship, like maybe you only podcast half the time. Maybe you podcast 75% and then like, and maybe your show only comes out once a month because your relationship needs more time than that. Like your offline relationship needs more time than that. Or you add in another coffee date, like maybe meet 3 times a month or whatever, just do what works, but also make sure like you don't want to lose that friendship that you spent 6 years developing for the sake of a show.
Right. Yeah, and I could see that tension mounting because Jason is also very impatient and was like, when's the episode gonna be edited? When is it coming? When's it gonna be edited? And I was like, we can't live like this. And he caught it before I did. And then Jason's a very established marriage mentor, among other things. And I'll read it straight from the text he just sent me like yesterday. He was asking like, when is the episode going to be ready? And I knew I'm asking this. So he chimes in and I kid you not, he says, how can I better show you how much I love you? And I was like, get out of my face. What does this even mean? And he was like, it's a marriage go-to. And I think he could sense like there's a tension building, and he sensed it before that because he said, we got to record this offline, right? Like, or we got to go offline and not record. I mean, like we've got to have that thing. So, and I love your mention of, was it Annie and Eddie? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
It's called? And just that they started with this hyper intense pace and then recognized that wasn't sustainable. Because right now we just took our every other week coffee and started recording it. Mm-hmm. And so we might have to pull back and go, we record once a month, or we record, 2 times a month, but we meet 1 time in between, which might be more sustainable. Okay, so it's 9 o'clock. We've gone a little bit over. I want to give Jyllea, thank you so much. This was amazing. Really, really packed full of content. She has shared in the Zoom chat, and I just shared it on Facebook, a podcast about how to start a podcast, which is super meta. And I love it. So like an episode of Community. So check that out. She's got the resources that's been shared already in chat. It's on her website. Remind us of your website. If we haven't seen chat, your website is wondermentwa.com.
I'm going to type it in just in case that is
okay. Love it.
Like Wonderment Washington, but just WA.
Just WA. And if you have any other questions, we can keep the conversation going. But otherwise, if you've got to peel off and go do the rest of your day, that's great. Again, thank you so much to everyone who joined us both on Facebook and on Zoom. It's so great to be able to do this with all of you. This has been one of the highlights of the year and has created such a huge issue for me. As we go forward and start getting back into, in-person interactions becoming more normal again, I'm faced with the dilemma of how do I record this and keep it going? So just know I'm putting in the work behind the scenes to try to figure out, even when we're able to meet in person with Business Brew, I want to keep recording it and making it available. So we'll figure that out. So again, thank you to everybody. Thank you, Jyllea. Any parting thoughts?
Yep. Yes. So the thing that reminded me that I had that episode is when Jason started talking about basically just like watching your dynamic of, I don't want to do that. That sounds scary. And Jason being like, why? Just do it. It reminded me of my origin story, which I'm not going to tell the whole thing because it's in that episode.
Right.
But it's just it's my favorite thing to set up. I was at Disneyland with my brother in line for Autopia. And I said, I would love to start a podcast, but I'm just too interested in too many things. And he was like, what are you talking about? That's perfect. And it took me almost a year to like come around to the idea. Actually less, I think like 6 months or something. But anyways, it just reminded me that like sometimes people like us just need a push.
Totally. You just need to push, even when you feel like you've got everything else figured out. Okay, great wisdom to end on. Thank you so much for your time. If you'll hang out just a little bit, I've got some questions. Otherwise, thank you everyone for joining us, and have a great rest of your Thursday.